Hi, and welcome to Learning Tidbits with Jeannie Malone. Today we are going to be talking about setting the scene. We're going to be using Jack London's The Call of the Wild. As you already know, I love this novel. It is so well written. We can learn so much from it to help us improve as readers and as writers. So let's get right into it. Let's look at why setting the scene matters. Why does it matter that the author takes such great detail to help us experience the place that the story is happening? Well, the setting creates the mood for the story. It can create a mood of suspense. It can create a mood of excitement, a mood of horror, a mood of happiness, of romance, of so many different things. It can even set a mood of chaos. Setting allows the reader to experience and better understand the characters' personalities, their motives, and their actions. In other words, the place that the characters are, it really plays a major role in helping us understand the characters' personalities, who they are, what they do, and why they do what they do in that place and in that situation. Setting plays an important role in helping the reader to make connections and to see contrast throughout the story. So recognizing the setting right off the bat in chapter 1 can play a major role in how you understand a different setting near the end of the story. And it can also help you again to understand the changes in characters and their changes in their actions and their behaviors. A change in setting can highlight the changes in the characters. Now, let's look in Jack London's The Call of the Wild. Let's start out in chapter 1. This starts out in the second paragraph of chapter 1. Let's read along together. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. Judge Miller's place it was called. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around its four sides. The house was approached by gravel driveways, which wound about through the wide-spreading lawns and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. At the rear, things were on an even more spacious scale than at the front. There were great stables where a dozen grooms and boys held forth, rows of vine-clad servants' cottages, and endless and orderly arrays of outhouses, long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards, and berry patches. Then there was the pumping plant for the artesian well, and the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. Wow, what a beautiful place. I want to go there. So you probably have a pretty good picture of Buck's home in your mind, right? We see this place, and we see all of its grandeur because of how Jack London described it to us. Every word that London writes helped to form that image in our mind of Buck's home. But some words play an even more critical role in helping us visualize the scene. So let's take a closer look at some of these words. I want you to notice the imagery. Remember, imagery is writing that incorporates the use of our senses. What we see, what we smell, what we hear, what we taste, what we feel. Physical touch, like what you would feel if you were walking barefoot on a gravel drive. You would feel the gravel under your feet. Or if you're at the beach, you feel the sand between your toes. Those are sensory imagery uses. Now, I want us to look at the adjectives. If you don't remember what an adjective is, remember it's a describing word. It describes a person, place, or a thing in some way. And we can also have, adjective phrases. We're not going to get into all that grammar today, but we're looking for things that describe people, places, and things. So let's notice this imagery in this adjective use. Okay, what kind of house did he live in? Buck lived at a big house. Well, was it just a big house in a bad location? No, it was in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. What does that evoke in your mind when you read sun-kissed? It kind of makes you have a warm feeling, like the sun is coming down upon your shoulders in the late spring. Just a good warm feeling. It doesn't feel miserable, but it gives a positive connotation to this description. Now, I want you to look where it stood back from the road. We're in the second line. It stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees. That tells us it's a good shady area with lots of good healthy trees. Through the glimpses could be caught the wide, cool veranda that ran around its four sides. Now, guys, if you have a four-sided porch, if you have a porch on all parts of your house, even today, that's pretty spectacular. That's not common. It's considered very, very nice. It's a very nice feature that most of us don't have. The house was approached by gravel driveways. Well, I want you to remember at this time, this was written in 1903, so, we didn't have everything paved like it is now, but to have a place with a long stretch of road, your own private road out in the country that was graveled back then was very well to do. So, that again tells us the wealth that is connected with Buck's home and Buck's family. So we see that there are wide spreading lawns. What does that evoke in your mind? Wide spreading lawns. It gives you that sense of space, plenty of space, plenty of land that belongs to this home, this family, this dog. The interlacing boughs of the tall poplars. Those tall poplars have been there for a long time. Because they're tall, they've grown a long time, they have the interlacing boughs. They were very strategically allowed to grow there or planted there to grow. And they're part of the purposeful landscape. So we see already that this is a very nice place that's taken well care of. And then we see at the rear, things were on an even more spacious scale than at the front. So there's even more land behind the home. We see that there were great stables where a dozen grooms and boys held forth. So this place we see is already very busy and productive and requires the work of many people to keep it up. We see the rows of vine-clad servants' cottages. So they have lots of workers who live there on the land. And there's an endless and orderly array of outhouses. Okay, again, remember this was over 100 years ago. They didn't have the indoor plumbing to have the toilets and such that we have now. They used what they called outhouses. There were the long grape arbors. So we see, it has vineyard. It has the green pastures. It has the orchards. What are orchards? Orchards are where you have fruit trees. So you have the vineyard, you have pastures, which means you have livestock. You have cows or sheep or something living there. You have the orchards with the fruit trees, and then you have berry patches. So it's a very diverse, very healthy place. So we get in our minds that Buck lives in this very large, very healthy, very productive place with lots of people. Okay, and we also see, that Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge in the big cement tank. Well, that these boys go for a little morning dip each morning tells us, there's pretty good weather for it, most of the year at least. But, we see it's routine. Not only does that tell something about the weather there at their home, it's ideal, but we also see that it's just something that is part of the life, the culture for this family, for these boys to enjoy a little dip each morning. So we see that is part of their family culture, something that many people over 100 years ago would not have been able to enjoy. It was just this was a little extra blessing part of the life. And why is that important? Because again, it kind of concretes in your mind what kind of family, what kind of place Buck is accustomed to. He's accustomed to privilege and healthy living and in such a beautiful place. So now I want you to notice the strategy of the spatial order. Spatial order simply means that as you're coming upon something, as you're approaching this property, what do you see first? And then what do you see next? And so forth. So it's spatial order is literally when you're driving up to your best friend's house, what do you see first as you come around the curve approaching this house? Do you see the mailbox and the garbage can first? And then you can see the driveway, then you can see the corner of the house, then you see some trees, you see the swing in the front yard as you're turning into the driveway. That's spatial order. It's what you see first and next and so forth as you continue to approach the place or the object, be the case. But London describes here, he describes the scene as if we're approaching it. So you could close your eyes. If someone was reading the story to you, you could close your eyes and just imagine this, like you are moving. You're not staying still. You are actually moving, approaching this house, this beautiful property, and already with the details of the property, getting to know a little bit about Buck and his family. So as you read, you visualize how it appears in progression, because you didn't see everything all at once. You didn't see that the back was more spacious than the front before you even got there. We see the details in the physical order as if we were touring the property. London gives us the big picture, but then he also gives us some greater details to show us more about the characters as we progress into the scene, because at first we saw it was this large property and we saw the trees, we saw the verandas around the house, we saw the large yards. We see more and more detail as we go on, but at first you did notice that big picture. It's this beautiful place of a grand scale. And then you notice more details about it, like the boys jumping in the big cement tank. You notice the lines of the servants' cottages and the outhouses. So then you're like, wow, this is not just a large place. It's a very busy, productive, large place. So we get those greater details as you progress into the scene. All right, so first impressions are everything. We all know that. So what do you see about this property in sentences 1, 3, and 4? Let's look at sentence 1. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. All right, guys, so I'm testing what you've been paying attention to here. We see that he lives in that big house, okay? Big. It's not some rickety little shack. And he lives in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley. So again, that evokes a sense of warmness, like when you have the warm summer sun on your shoulders. It's not too hot and miserable, but it gives a positive connotation. It makes you have a positive feeling about the place where Buck lives. Sentence 3, it stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around its 4 sides. All right, so it stood back from the road. They didn't have to use up their all of their property to build the house. They could choose where on the property to build the house. So it's away from the road and half hidden among the trees. So, and then you see the greater detail of the wide, cool veranda around the 4 sides. Again, even today, if someone has a porch that runs along all sides of their house, we're like, wow, that's so cool. I wish I had that. It's not something that we typically have on all of our houses. If you even live in a house, most of us don't even live in a single family dwelling home. Most of us live in multiple family complexes where we live in apartments, condos, or townhomes. So, you know, this family had this much land is just wow. It's the wow factor. Especially today, over 100 years after it was written, people have a lot less land to themselves than they did at the time this was written. because there are more of us. All right, let's look at sentence 4. The house was approached by graveled driveways. And yes, guys, I do recognize the spelling of graveled is different here. It uses the traditional double L, which was the commonly accepted way to spell it at the time. Nowadays, you would only have one L in the word, but this is the way that Jack London wrote it in The Call of the Wild, so that is why in this quotation it is how he wrote it. It's not how we would spell it today with only one L. Anyway, the house was approached by graveled driveways which wound about through wide spreading lawns and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. 3 details here, guys. We've already gone over them a little bit, but look, again, remember in 1903, people didn't have the perfectly paved roads that went everywhere as we have today. Well, even today, if a family has a large amount of land out in the country, a lot of times that the roads that cross that land that are their personal roads and personal drives, those aren't typically paved with asphalt or concrete or something. They, if anything, if they're lucky, if the family is wealthy, even today, those roads and drives will be graveled. So back then, over 100 years ago, for this large property to have its roads graveled is amazing. That showed a very positive sign of wealth back then. Now, these gravel driveways wound about through wide spreading lawns. So, at another point we are mentioned the pastures, the orchards, the vineyards. We have mentioned of all of that, but here it's just the wide spreading lawns. So it's kind of like just that extra beautiful land that's, not even being used heavily for growing the fruit, growing the grapes, growing the berries, pasturing the cows or sheep or whatnot, or horses. It's just wide spreading lawns, just there for beauty and just extra on the property. So again, we get that extra sense of the awe factor. And then we have the interlacing boughs of the tall poplars. Those tall poplars, again, they were allowed to grow or planted there to grow on purpose. Poplars are very beautiful trees. I love the bark. I love the leaves. They turn this beautiful yellow in the fall. I have a poplar tree on my property, and I absolutely love it. Their bark is not quite the same as a birch, but it is a light color, so the way it contrasts with the yellow leaves in the fall is absolutely gorgeous. And I'm in Alabama in the U.S., and so if you don't have poplar trees, maybe you can look them up and see how beautiful they really are. All right. So we have this again, the sense of these established trees. They have the interlacing boughs. So that gives a sense of comfort. Maybe when that summer sun is getting a little warm, when someone's traveling on this road, you have those interlacing boughs of tall poplars to kind of shade you from that hot sun, to kind of give you that comfort. Or maybe to shade you when it's gently drizzling rain, then it's going to keep a little bit of the rain off. But it does give that sense of establishment and comfort. So again, London used every single word purposely, and many of these words we can pick out to recognize they have an even extra special purpose. And when we pay attention to the vocabulary used, then we get a greater understanding of the setting. And again, that setting is so important because it plays a major role throughout the story of helping us to understand the characters, their personalities, their motives, their actions, all these different things. So now think of that picture of Buck's home, the whole place. Think of this in your mind. Okay, as we see Buck's home in paragraph 2, bam, right there off the bat, we realize the details are important. It gives us that sense of grandeur, the spaciousness, the natural beauty of Buck's home. We see that it's well established, it's healthy, productive, it provides employment and benefit for many, many people. So, again, why do you think we need to see and understand Buck's home? Jack London begins this epic story of Buck. And Buck is he's a half St. Bernard and half Scotch Shepherd dog. And he lives very comfortably on Judge Miller's thriving vineyard in the Santa Clara Valley in California, where he serves purpose and he is loved and he is respected. He definitely has a place in this family. Now, let's jump ahead to chapter 2. After we see Buck very comfortable, cozy on this very wealthy vineyard with his family, let's jump ahead to chapter 2. And I know, guys, there are tons of details. I really would like for you to read this novel for yourself because there's a lot to know about Buck and his family and this place that you don't see in this little bitty paragraph, that part of paragraph 2 that we read. So again, go back and read it all for yourself. But for now, let's go ahead and jump ahead to chapter 2. And we're going to see Buck after, gosh, should I tell you or not? I guess I should. I will tell you that the gardener of this property, this beautiful property we've just described, this gardener kidnapped Buck and he sold him. I'm not sure if I'm going to tell you later why he sold him, but for right now I'm not going to do that. But anyway, this gardener kidnapped Buck and he sold him for profit for himself. So now poor Buck, he has had a rough couple of days, and now he has arrived at this completely new place that is very far from his home. So let's read about this place. Buck's first day at the Dia Beach was like a nightmare. Every hour was filled with shock and surprise. He had been suddenly jerked from the heart of civilization and flung into the heart of things primordial. No lazy sun-kissed life was this, with nothing to do but loaf and be bored. Here was neither peace, nor rest, nor a moment's safety. All was confusion and action, and every moment life and limb were in peril. There was imperative need to be constantly alert, for these dogs and men were not town dogs and men. They were savages, all of them, who knew no law but the law of club and fang. That's paragraph 1 of chapter 2. And this is not a very long novel at all. You can read it, I guess average time reader could read this whole novel in about 4.5 hours. So it's not very long. So this isn't very far past what we just read in chapter 1, the second paragraph. But this is the first paragraph of chapter 2. Buck is in a new place 2 days later after lots and lots of misery that seems, oh my goodness, is he going to live through it? But now he's at this completely new place. Now, why do you think London puts such great effort into describing this place? Again, he doesn't give us too many words. It's not a huge, long novel, but every word has a purpose. And that's what I want you guys to understand. Whether it's to improve your reading skills or to improve your writing skills, understand every word has a purpose, and some words serve multiple purposes. They really have dual duty. So looking at this in chapter 2, I want you to think of how this place contrasts to Buck's home. Okay, Buck's home was very safe. This place is not safe. Buck's home was very comfortable. This place is not comfortable. This place is not stable. It is harsh. And the nature of this place dictates life to be lived in a very different manner than life was to be lived at Judge Miller's place. How do we know all of this? Again, by the words that London used and how he used them. In that detail that we saw in one paragraph, just part of one paragraph, about Buck's home, we saw that it was safe and comfortable, stable. It was not harsh at all. It was very mild. And it was very easy to be relaxed in that place and feel safe. But that is absolutely the opposite of what he experiences once he arrives at Dia Beach. So, again, the words used play a major role. The setting plays a major role. So what makes us see this difference? Well, Jack London makes specific contrast to the scene at the beginning of chapter 1. He uses the language to show the negative circumstances and Buck's negative perception. Even though we have a third person narrator, it's what we call the limited omniscient third person narrator. If you're not familiar with that, or if you've forgotten what that is, all that means is we're not reading the story through Buck's perspective. It's not that Buck is the narrator. Buck's not like telling us the story. An outside person is telling us the story, but this outside narrator has the knowledge of Buck's feelings and Buck's thoughts and Buck's his inner personality. So even though it's not Buck telling the story, the third person narrator has the knowledge of Buck. Okay, so that's what we call a limited omniscient third person narrator. Okay, now let's look at that very first sentence of this paragraph. Buck's first day on the Daiya beach was like a nightmare. Okay, it's written in third person, but with Buck's perspective of it being a nightmare. Okay, does that help you understand maybe that limited omniscient third person narrator? I hope so. But also look at the negative language that's used, nightmare. Can you think of a nightmare as being anything but bad? No, a nightmare is a bad dream. It's not a good dream. It's not just a dream. If it was just a dream, we would have the word dream, but it was a bad dream. It was a nightmare. It was a very bad occurrence. So let's look at the language, contrasting Daiya Beach to Judge Miller's Place. No lazy, sun-kissed life was this. Do you remember the imagery that Jack London used, which gave us that feeling of the warm sun kissing our shoulders, that sort of thing, that experience that we had reading about Judge Miller's Place? Well, notice that opposition here, the contrast. No lazy, sun-kissed life was this, but nothing to do but loaf and be bored, because we had that feeling, we had the impression of this large expanse of beautiful rolling countryside where Buck could just loaf and roam, and it wasn't that he had to be on guard for his life or working every single moment. There was leisure and pleasure involved in his life and existence there at Judge Miller's Place. But here was neither peace, nor rest, nor a moment's safety. All was confusion and action, and every moment life and limb were in peril. Did we get a sense that Buck had confusion, or that every moment was a danger, a life-threatening moment at Judge Miller's? No, absolutely not. We got a sense of peace and rest and safety. We got a sense of order and structure and purpose, productivity, but within a reasonable zone of comfort. Life and limb were not in peril for Buck or anyone on the vineyard. Judge Miller's Place was safe and comfortable and simple and relaxed and an easy pace. But at Daiya Beach, it was very unsafe, uncomfortable, it was chaotic, it was exhausting, and it required constant vigilance. Buck felt that if he let off guard for 1 second, he might die. That's not a good feeling to have. So let's look at the language contrasting the people in these two places. These dogs and men were not town dogs and men. Town. So now we have that contrast, even though in that opening description of Judge Miller's Place, we weren't out and out told that the men and dogs here are town dogs, town men. No, we weren't exactly told that outright, but we had the impression of that through the structure and the order and the productivity, but also the relaxed sense of comfort. You didn't have to constantly be on guard for your life. So it was a comfortable, relaxed productivity. So here we have the sentence is just outright written, these dogs and men were not town dogs and men. So even though we weren't told in the beginning the dogs and men were town dogs and men, we see this contrast to the impression that we were given that they were town dogs and men. Okay, but these are savages here at Daya Beach. They were savages, all of them. Savages is the contrast to town dogs and men, right? Okay, savage meant, if you're not sure, well, what does savage mean? Look in the rest of the sentence. They were savages, all of them, who knew no law but the law of club and fang. Now, there's a part in chapter 1 where poor Buck learns the law of the club, and he is just now learning the law of the fang when we read this. So you would need to read the other parts of the story up until now to understand his lesson that he learned about the law of club. But it's basically when he was beaten into submission. Buck was not accustomed to physical abuse at all. He was very privileged. He knew his place in his family. He felt comfortable and safe in his family, and therefore if Judge Miller or one of the family wanted Buck to do something, he did it because he respected them and felt safe in their care. However, after being kidnapped and sold, he changed hands a few times, and when he finally got to the second to last person that he would be with before he got sold to his final new owner, a man in a red sweater, he was like the dog breaker. He was the one who would break these dogs into submission, and he literally did that by breaking their bodies, and it's a terrible thing. But that is what we see. That's how we get the impression of the savageness of these men and these dogs, and that's where Buck learns the law of the club. So that's why the reference is made here. They were savages, all of them, who know no law but the law of the club and the fang. Alright, so what do we know about these men and dogs at the Daya Beach? They're not town dogs and men. They're savages. They're rough. They're all about dog eat dog, I guess we could say. It's all savage and for me and me alone to survive. I'm here to keep myself alive, and if I need to kill you, I will. It's all about personal survival. So how do we know that these men and dogs Buck knew at Judge Miller's place were different? We just discussed that. So again, even though we weren't out and out told that the people and the dogs at Judge Miller's place were town dogs and men, we got that impression from the setting and the interactions of the people that we saw, and just the general feeling of comfort that is conveyed by the language. Now, pay attention to the details. No matter if you're reading The Call of the Wild or something else, pay attention to the details because authors give us details to help us understand the text. It doesn't have to be Jack London's work. I'm just a major fan. Okay, as we look for clues to characters, relationships, and action and plot possibilities, the more you read this way, paying attention to the details, the more this becomes habit and you don't actually have to think about it. Every time you read, pay attention to the imagery, the senses, okay? What does the author want you to experience through your senses? What does the author want you to smell and see and hear as you are learning a new place, as you're in a new experience with the character? Okay, pay attention to the details that show similarities and differences, like we just paid attention to the contrast, the major contrast made between Judge Miller's place and Daya Beach. Pay attention to similarities and differences, not only between places, but the people. You know, we saw the different people at Judge Miller's place and the different people at Daya Beach. They were savage. And look at the different situations, okay? Because all these things go hand in hand. Authors, they craft the places, the setting, and the characters, the people or animals, and the situations that those characters are in those settings, to give us a fuller understanding, to help us really experience the text. Authors don't just write something for us to skim over the words on the page. They want us to experience the stories. That's what makes the impact on our own lives and our own thinking. So pay attention to all these details. Pay attention to specific details such as adjectives that are descriptions, telling us descriptions about the people, the places, the things. Like we talked about the tall poplars and the big house and the wide-spreading lawns. Those were specific descriptive details, adjectives that help us understand more about the things and the places. So look at the adverbs. Okay, the adverbs are descriptions that tell us how or why or when, where, and to what extent. There's a lot of this in action. Okay, like I did reference the man in the red sweater, who is the man who would beat the dogs into submission. That is terrible. I don't even like mentioning it, but it does help us to understand a lot of critical context in the novel. But there's a lot of understanding that we can glean by paying attention to the adverbs, okay? How the man beat the dogs, when he would beat the dogs, because it was each time the dog would make an advance toward the man. It was a battle of wills, and to what extent did he beat the dogs? And that mattered because it depended on the dog's interactions. So even though that's terrible to talk about, I know this is a 5th grade novel, so I mean, I enjoy it so much as an adult, so much more than I would have as a 5th grader. But whether you're a 5th grader or an adult, paying attention to all these details will definitely help you with whatever you're reading. Okay, whether it's Harry Potter or The Secret Garden, whatever, you're going to get a lot more out of it if you pay attention to the details. Okay, guys, if you like to write like me, then when you write, visually walk through your scene. Okay, walk your reader through your scene. And how you're going to do this is by first walking through it yourself, using your senses turned on and tuned in hypersensitivity mode, meaning pay attention to everything. Like every step you take visually, like metaphorically, I guess, is you're going to go into your scene in your mind. Every step you take, what do you hear? What do you feel? What do you see? What do you smell? Maybe even taste when it's appropriate. So include all these details because that's going to help your reader experience the scene just as you imagine it. If you don't incorporate this, your reader's not going to get that full experience. So remember, details set the mood, and they even play a major role in the character development and the furthering of the action in the story. So do your I misspelled. Do your characters behave or respond or even think differently in different settings? Can your setting help your reader see and understand the metamorphosis of a character, such as the metamorphosis of Buck's character in The Call of the Wild? You want your setting to play a purpose other than just being a place that's not important. That place has an importance, and it's up to you to use details to make sure to make sure your reader understands that importance.